There are moments in a man's life that split everything into two halves, the before and the after. The moment my son took his last breath inside a hospital that my wife owned was the moment my before died with him. I did not know she owned it. I did not know she had the money to save him. I stood at the billing desk of Riverside General Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, with $37 in my checking account and a child fighting for his life 2 floors above me, and I begged. I begged strangers in lanyards and scrubs to help my boy. None of them told me that the woman I had shared a bed with for 11 years was the silent majority shareholder of the building I was standing in. That is not a plot from a movie. That is my life. And it took me 2 years to understand all of it. My name is not important. What is important is that you understand exactly how a man can live beside someone every single day and never truly know them. My wife, I'll call her Dana, was the kind of woman who made every room feel warmer when she walked into it. She had a laugh that carried. She had an opinion on everything, a softness with our son that made me believe in the simplest and most honest part of me that she was incapable of cruelty. That belief nearly destroyed me. Not because she was cruel in the obvious way, not in the way you can point to and say, there, that's the villain. It was worse than that. It was the kind of cruelty that wears the face of someone you love. And it doesn't show itself until your child is dying, and the numbers on a hospital billing screen are the only thing standing between him and a surgery that could have saved his life. Our son's name was Marcus. He was 8 years old. He was the kind of kid who collected rocks because he thought each one had a story. He had a habit of narrating his own life out loud, like a sports commentator, while he did ordinary things, pouring cereal, tying his shoes. He would say, "And Marcus Hayes goes for the double knot. Will he make it? Yes, he does. The crowd goes wild." He was the loudest, quiet thing I had ever loved. In the fall of 2021, Marcus started complaining about stomach pain. At first, we thought it was the kind of thing that passes, a bug, bad food from the school cafeteria, growing pains. But it didn't pass. It got worse over 3 weeks until one Thursday night, he doubled over in the kitchen and couldn't stand back up. We rushed him to the nearest emergency room, which happened to be Riverside General. In Charlotte, North Carolina, Riverside General was not the biggest hospital, but it had a solid reputation in the community. It had been bought out and restructured in 2018 after a previous ownership group ran it into near bankruptcy. The new ownership had kept a low public profile. The hospital had a CEO who gave press statements, a board of directors whose names were listed on the website, and a quiet group of private investors who had recapitalized the facility. Dana's name did not appear on any public document I had ever seen related to that hospital. Under federal law, specifically the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, known as EMTALA, hospitals are required to screen and stabilize any patient who arrives in a medical emergency, regardless of their ability to pay. That night, Marcus was screened. He was stabilized enough to be admitted. The problem came 3 days later. The diagnosis was a severe intestinal obstruction with complications that had, by that point, progressed to a degree that required immediate surgical intervention. The surgeon who came to speak with me in the family waiting area on the 3rd floor was not unkind. He was direct. He told me Marcus needed surgery within the next 24 to 48 hours. He told me the surgery carried risks, but that without it, the risks were far greater. Then he left, and a financial counselor came to take his seat. She slid a paper across the table. The estimated cost of the procedure, the anesthesiology, and the post-operative care came to just over $62,000. I did not have insurance. We had let it lapse 4 months earlier after I lost my job at a logistics company that had downsized its regional office. I was 3 weeks away from starting a new position. 3 weeks. I stared at $62,000 and felt the floor tilt beneath me. I called Dana. She answered on the second ring. I told her the number. I told her what the surgeon had said. I told her Marcus needed this surgery, and I needed to know what we had, what we could access, what we could do. She was quiet for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then she said she didn't have it. She said our savings account had about $4,000. She said her business accounts. She ran a small interior design consulting firm, at least that's what I had always believed her primary income to be, were tied up in operating costs. She said she didn't know what we were going to do. She cried. I believed her, because I had no reason not to. I had been married to her for 11 years, and in 11 years I had never had a reason not to believe her. I spent the next 36 hours doing what desperate people do. I called my mother in Greensboro, who offered $300 she could not spare. I called my older brother in Atlanta, who sent $1,000. I started a GoFundMe page that raised just over $1,100 in the first day. I spoke to the hospital's financial assistance office and was told the Charity Care program had a 2 to 4 week processing window for applications. I asked if there was any way to expedite it given the urgency. I was told the process was the process. I asked to speak to hospital administration. I was told the administrator on duty would return my call. That call never came. I was not aware, in any of these conversations, that the woman I had left at home to manage things while I stayed at Marcus's bedside had a direct line to every decision being made in that building. On the evening of the second day after the surgical recommendation, Marcus's condition deteriorated faster than the medical team had anticipated. His obstruction had progressed to a perforation. What had been a serious but manageable emergency had now become critical. The surgical team moved quickly. Under EMTALA, once a patient's condition becomes an active, life-threatening emergency, the hospital is legally required to stabilize them regardless of payment status. They took Marcus into surgery that night. I signed consent forms in a hallway while a nurse held a clipboard in front of me. I remember the fluorescent lights. I remember that my hands were shaking so badly that my signature barely looked like my own name. I remember thinking that everything was going to be fine, because they were finally taking him back there, and that meant they could fix it. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. The surgeon came out to the waiting room at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning. He sat down across from me, and he looked at me in the way that doctors look at you when the news has already happened and there is nothing left to do but say it. Marcus had not survived. The perforation had caused septic complications that his small body could not overcome. The delay, the 36-plus hours between the initial surgical recommendation and the emergency intervention, had allowed the infection to spread beyond what could be corrected in time. The surgeon said all the right things. He was compassionate, measured, careful with his words. But what I heard underneath every sentence he said was this: there had been a window, and the window had closed, and my son was gone. I want to be honest about what the weeks after Marcus died felt like, because I think people often skip over this part of these stories in favor of the revelation, the confrontation, the drama. But grief is not dramatic. Grief is extremely quiet and extremely heavy. I went home to a house full of his things. His rock collection on the windowsill in his room. His backpack by the front door still packed, because he had gone to school the morning of the day we rushed to the ER. His shoes, size 4, by the mat. Dana and I moved around each other in that house like two people sharing a waiting room with no shared destination. We cried together. We held each other. We went to the funeral together, and we stood side by side while his teacher from 2nd grade gave a eulogy that made the whole room break open. We were, by every visible measure, two parents united in grief. What I did not know was that Dana had already started managing what came next. The investigation, if you could call it that in its early form, began not with any dramatic revelation, but with a bill. About 6 weeks after Marcus died, I received a statement from Riverside General itemizing the charges from his hospitalization. It was addressed to me as the financially responsible party, and it listed amounts for the ER visit, the 3 days of admission, the surgical procedure, the anesthesiology, and the post-operative emergency care. The total was just under $89,000. I wasn't surprised by the bill itself. I had known it was coming. What surprised me was a line item I didn't recognize near the bottom of the document, listed under an internal account classification code that I didn't understand. I called the billing department to ask about it. The woman on the phone was helpful but confused. She put me on hold for several minutes. When she came back, she said she wasn't sure she could discuss that classification with me and that I might need to speak to someone in the ownership office. Ownership office. That phrase stopped me cold. I asked her what she meant by the ownership office. She said it was the administrative department that handled matters related to the hospital's investor group. I asked her, with a calm I did not feel, whether she could tell me anything about who the investors were. There was a pause. She said she wasn't authorized to share that information and that I would need to submit a formal request. I thanked her and I hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Dana was in the other room. I could hear her on the phone, talking to someone about a design project, laughing softly at something the other person had said. I listened to her laugh, and something that I cannot fully explain to you shifted in my chest. Not suspicion exactly. Something quieter and more unsettling than suspicion. A question I wasn't ready to ask. I hired a paralegal to help me with the paperwork for a potential wrongful death consultation. Under North Carolina law, the parents of a deceased minor child can bring a wrongful death claim if the death resulted from negligence, including a delay in care that was foreseeable and preventable. I was not sure I had a case. I was not sure of anything at that point, but I needed to do something that felt like moving forward, because the alternative was standing still in a house that still smelled like my son. The paralegal was a practical woman named Teresa who had been doing medical billing and legal document preparation for nearly 15 years. She was methodical. She pulled the public records on Riverside General, the corporate filings, the ownership restructuring documents from 2018, the shareholder disclosures that had been filed with the state at the time of the acquisition. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I remember exactly where I was when she called. I was in the parking lot of a grocery store. I had been sitting in my car for 20 minutes unable to go inside. Teresa said she had found something I needed to see. She said it carefully, the way people say things when they are not sure how the person on the other end is going to react. She said that among the original investors listed in the 2018 acquisition of Riverside General Medical Center, there was a holding company called Meridian Private Capital, LLC. She said that Meridian Private Capital, LLC, had a registered agent and sole managing member on file with the North Carolina Secretary of State's office. She said the name on that filing was Dana Marie Hayes, my wife's full legal name. I sat in that parking lot for a very long time. I did not go into the grocery store. I drove home and I sat in the driveway and I thought about the night in the family waiting room when the financial counselor had slid that paper across the table. I thought about the phone call I had made to Dana. I thought about her voice saying she didn't have the money. I thought about 36 hours. I thought about Marcus narrating himself tying his shoes and the crowd going wild and how quiet the house had been since November. Confronting Dana was not like the confrontations you see in films. There was no screaming. There was no dramatic table-flipping moment where all the secrets spill out at once. I came home with the documents Teresa had printed for me. I laid them on the kitchen table. I sat down across from my wife and I looked at her. I did not say anything right away. I let her look at the papers. I watched her face. And that is when I saw something I had never seen on Dana's face in 11 years. Not guilt, not shock, but something underneath both of those things, something that had clearly been there for a long time and had just run out of places to hide. She did not deny it. She confirmed it within about 2 minutes of sitting there. Meridian Private Capital was hers. She had been an investor in Riverside General since the 2018 restructuring. Her stake was substantial, just under 30% of the facility. What followed was not a simple explanation because nothing about it was simple. Dana's account of how she had come to invest in the hospital, why she had kept it secret, and what she had or had not known about Marcus's care during those 36 hours has never, to this day, been entirely consistent. The version she gave me that night at the kitchen table and the version that later emerged through legal proceedings contained enough discrepancies that I stopped trying to reconcile them and started simply cataloging them. What I can tell you is the documented version, the one that exists in filings and records, not in her words. Dana had inherited a significant sum of money from her maternal grandmother in 2016. The inheritance was approximately $420,000. I knew about the inheritance. I did not know its full size because Dana had described it to me as about $80,000, most of which we used for the renovation. The renovation of our kitchen had cost just under $40,000. I had never asked to see the documentation. That is a thing I have thought about many times since. She had taken the remaining money, the portion I did not know about, and invested it through a financial advisor into Meridian Private Capital, which she formed for the express purpose of joining the Riverside General Acquisition Group. She had done this, she said, because she had always wanted a stake in something real, something that would grow, something that wasn't tied to the unpredictability of her consulting work. She said she had planned to tell me about it once it was profitable and stable. She said she had been waiting for the right time. She said that by the time Marcus got sick, she was in the middle of a restructuring of her own investment position within the group and that her liquid access to the funds was genuinely restricted. I am not a financial expert. I cannot tell you with certainty whether that explanation was technically possible. What I can tell you is that her 30% stake in Riverside General, by the time of the events I have described, had an assessed value of approximately $1.2 million. Marcus's surgery had been estimated at $62,000. The legal proceedings that followed are a matter of public record in Mecklenburg County. My attorney filed a wrongful death claim against Riverside General Medical Center, citing negligence in the delay of surgical care for a pediatric patient whose condition was known to be rapidly deteriorating and for whom a surgical recommendation had already been made. The core of the claim was this: the hospital's financial gatekeeping process had created a delay that was not medically justified, and that delay had contributed materially to Marcus's death. Under North Carolina wrongful death law, damages can include the present monetary value of the deceased, medical expenses, funeral expenses, and the pain and suffering experienced prior to death. The case was complicated by the fact that EMTALA had ultimately been followed. Marcus had received emergency intervention once his condition escalated to the critical threshold. But my attorney argued persuasively that the system had allowed preventable deterioration in the hours before that threshold was met. A parallel line of inquiry that my attorney pursued concerned Dana's role. The question that went before the court, and this is the question that I believe is at the center of everything, was whether a part owner of a medical facility has any heightened duty of care when a family member of that owner is a patient in that facility, particularly in circumstances where the owner has both knowledge of the patient's condition and the financial means to intervene. North Carolina does not have a clean precedent on this specific question. The argument my attorney made was a civil one, not a criminal one, that Dana's concealment of her ownership and financial capacity in a situation where that ownership and capacity were directly relevant to her son's access to care, constituted a form of negligence and possibly fraud. Dana's legal team disputed this on multiple grounds, primarily that her investment position did not give her operational control over billing decisions, and that her personal finances were separate from the hospital's financial policies. The case settled out of court in the spring of 2023. The terms are under a confidentiality agreement that prevents me from disclosing the specific financial outcome. What I can tell you is that Riverside General's parent company, as part of the settlement, agreed to revise its financial assistance processing timeline for pediatric surgical cases. That change is real, and it is documented, and if it helps one child not go through what Marcus went through, then it is something, even if it is not enough. Dana and I divorced in January of 2023. The proceedings were not amicable, but they were not protracted either, because by that point we were both exhausted in the way that people become exhausted when they have been carrying something too heavy for too long. She lives in Raleigh now. I have not spoken to her in 14 months. I want to tell you something that I have not told many people because it is the part of this story that I find hardest to explain. Even after everything, after the documents, after the court filings, after the settlement, after the divorce, I have never been able to arrive at a clean verdict about Dana in my own mind. Not because I think what happened was acceptable. It was not. But because grief and betrayal do not organize themselves neatly into categories the way we want them to. There are days when the version of Dana I remember is the woman who sat beside Marcus's hospital bed on day 1 and held his hand and sang to him quietly. There are other days when what I remember is her voice on the phone saying she didn't have the money, and all I can think about is what she must have known in that moment. Both of those things happened. Both of those women are the same woman. That is the part I will probably spend the rest of my life trying to understand. What I have come to believe, not from certainty, but from the slow accumulation of the only evidence I have, which is my own experience, is that the systems we trust to protect us in our most vulnerable moments are often far more fragile and far more compromised than we allow ourselves to believe. The American healthcare system, in its current form, allows a child to be held at the edge of a life-saving surgery while his father stands at a billing counter with $37. Federal law requires that emergency care be given, but the definition of emergency is not always applied uniformly, and the gap between serious and critical can be the difference between a child who goes home and a child who doesn't. Riverside General followed the law. They followed the law, and Marcus died. That is a sentence I have said out loud approximately once, because it is the kind of sentence that, once you have said it, does not go back into silence easily. Marcus would have been 11 this past September. He would have been in 5th grade. He would have had a new rock in his collection, probably something he found at recess that looked ordinary to everyone else but that he had decided had a story. He would have been narrating himself through it, because that is what he did. That is who he was. A kid who believed that everything, even the small things, deserved a witness. I am trying to be that for him now. To witness what happened. To say it out loud, in whatever incomplete and imperfect way I can, so that it exists somewhere other than just inside me. I do not know if that is justice. I do not know if anything that comes after is justice, but Marcus was here, and what happened to him was real, and I am not going to let that disappear into the silence of a settlement agreement and a confidentiality clause. He was 8 years old. He collected rocks. He narrated his own life, and he deserved more time to live it.